It showed that in some areas, up to 50% of children were starting school without the necessary levels of language and communication.
I feel this episode is a little bit different. This isn't actually about Libby's story today. It's about us as a society, us as parents and grandparents. This is very much something that I think we really need to start over and rise in.
Children need a responsive communication partner. But if you're not feeling good about yourself, you're not going to be able to do that. So it's not that you don't want to, you're not going to be able to do that.
Welcome to Start Over and Rise. I'm Sara Burton, your host, and this is the podcast for you if you are ready for fresh starts to reclaim your power and create the life that you truly desire. Whether you're navigating a major life change, recovering from a setback, or simply just feeling a bit stuck or that something is missing, this is your space for inspiration, practical tools, and empowering conversations. Each week, we'll dive into topics that help you step into the person you're meant to be so that you can rise to your new desired heights. Because here's the truth. It's never too late to make a change, and it's never too early to start over. So let's get started. Hey Libby, welcome to Start Over and Rise. I am super excited to have you here. Would you like to start by introducing yourself, who you are and what you do?
Yeah, of course. It's great to be here. It's great to see you again. So I'm Libby Hill, and I'm a speech and language therapist, and I have been a speech and language therapist for a rather long time now. So it's 40 years next year. And things have changed a lot in that time.
Yes, and I invited you onto the show because I was casually having my coffee the other morning and I had the news on and I saw this feature about children as young as toddlers, 25% of them having smartphones and being constantly on screens, and how it is affecting their speech and how they're learning and so on. And I was literally within an hour on LinkedIn looking for Libby to invite her on. And thank you so much, because Libby, how big is this problem?
It's absolutely massive, but it isn't a new problem. So I've got to be clear, first of all, we're not talking about children who have a recognised reason for not developing their language skills. So this isn't the autistic children. We're not talking about the ones with Down syndrome or any form of learning difficulty. We're talking about children who otherwise would have developed their language and communication skills normally. So this goes back 2018, we had something called the Burko report. And the Burko report was horrific. It showed that in some areas, up to 50% of children were starting school without the necessary levels of language and communication. And the thing is, what happens is, if you're then a teacher trying to teach them the things that you want them to learn, it's like actually trying to build a wall without the bottom row of bricks. It's not going to go well. And there were lots of initiatives at that time. We had the Year of Communication in 2011. We had a communication czar even. But, nothing changed. And in 2000, that was 2008. In 2018, they redid it. And they found exactly the same. So despite all the initiatives and everything that had been put in, nothing had changed from 2008 to 2018. And then we had COVID. And people were asking questions, why is it that parents aren't stimulating their children anymore? Why aren't they doing what we always did? And the Americans were very black and white about it. And they said, wealthy families stimulate their children. Poor families don't do that. So that was a Hart and Risley study. But obviously, we know as a society it's not that simple. So I know families who have no money, but they are stimulating their children incredibly well. So we know here you can't be as simplistic as that. So there was a long-term study at Bristol, the Bristol Research Unit, and they actually took families and they looked at them long term, so over sort of 10 years. And what they found was that there were certain factors that meant that parents weren't available to their children. And if you think about this was before lockdown, so the factors that they found that influenced whether or not you were stimulating your children. First one, how you feel about yourself. So if you think about the demands on particularly a woman these days, so if anybody's worried about how they look, um, how much money they've got, uh, their living conditions, relationship issues, the whole gamut of pressures on a woman today, um, that has a massive effect on whether or not you're stimulating your children, because you need to be available, lively. Children need a responsive communication partner. But if you're not feeling good about yourself, you're not going to be able to do that. So it's not that you don't want to, you're not going to be able to do that. Second thing they found was, where do people go? Are they going to the libraries? Are they going to the children's centres? Are they taking their preschoolers to Moo Music or Sensory Tots? And what they found was that families weren't accessing those beautifully language stimulating places to go. And the last one was, what toys do they have available? Now, they might have an iPad, they might be able to play with an iPhone, but do they know that you can actually make music with a saucepan and a wooden spoon? Do they know the joys of a cardboard box? And people didn't know that. They weren't singing with their children. And this was before lockdown. And we all know in lockdown, all those things were made 100 times worse. So we were all worried. Think about Maslow's hierarchy. Right at the bottom, we did not feel safe. We weren't having our basic needs met. We were all on edge. We didn't know whether we were going to die by somebody sneezing, 2 paces away. We didn't know. We were all worried. We were all under such pressure. And then we couldn't go to grandparents, never mind to music classes, the library, or the other stimulating places. And, if we didn't know that you could play with a cardboard box, you were limited to the toys that they had available at that particular time. Now, nobody yet has actually looked at that. We know the stats are massive. So there's probably 1.9 million children who need speech and language therapy in the UK at the moment, with a dwindling number of speech and language therapists. But it's just massive. And, people were saying, all the curriculum they've missed with not going to school, that is insignificant compared to the interaction they missed with other family members, with other children, with other adults. And that will have had such a big effect. I don't care about the curriculum. The curriculum is arbitrary. It's set up by people who decide that's what it should be. But it's about the language and the communication. And children are coming to school at a complete disadvantage. So partly, I know we live in a very busy world. So if you want to get on with cooking tea, you're going to put them in front of the television, or you're going to give them an iPad or your smartphone to occupy them. But all parents want the best for their children. The problem is we've lost sight of what that should be. And that is the real crux of it. There's a book called Why Love Matters, crap title, but it's a really good book by Sue Gerhardt, and she looks at what we need to stimulate the brain. And she quotes the babies from the Romanian orphanages, so you'll remember those. Others of your listeners might not. But basically, those children, they were fed, they were clothed, but they weren't stimulated. Who was smiling at them? Who was playing with them? Who was doing what we normally do with babies and toddlers? Nobody. And when they've been brain scanned, there's actually like a black hole in the prefrontal cortex because they didn't get that stimulation. And, we can't do that routinely with all the children, but we do know that a baby's or a child at 3, a child who's been well stimulated, they will have some, great white matter in their brain. Their brain will be bigger than a child of 3 who has not had that stimulation. They've been deprived. So your brain looks completely different. And it honestly, it's such a big problem that people don't know about.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to do this, because I thought when you said to me, "Oh, you know, this isn't new," I was horrified because I think, well, my children obviously are, well, they're adult children now, so that's very different. But um, I I don't have any grandchildren in my life at the moment. I don't have any little ones around because they're all moving up. I'm sure I'll have it to come. I hope I'll have it to come. But it's so worrying because I don't know. I think I think the most horrific thing that I heard was that in prams now there are actually sort of things that you can slip an iPad into so that as the baby is lying down, they can, have this sort of stimulation. And I was so horrified because I think with my kids and also how I was brought up as well is like it's not just teaching them colors and it's the whole teaching them how they learn, teaching to have confidence, teaching to be able to interact and understand emotion and faces and language and tone and all of these things. And I'm not even, clearly I'm not an expert, but you just know these things are important because you know how your children respond to it. And I'm not here to sort of say that we need to get judgy about people who are using, because let's face it, there is a time and a need sometimes when maybe you have got to do something and it is there. But you know, yeah, how long is too long on screens?
Well, the French banned screen times for their under 3s a few years ago. I think it was about 2010. And then the guidance since that is if you're under 3, no more than an hour a day. Because if you think about it, it's completely stimulating your visual ability, but it's not stimulating your auditory ability. And what's the method of instruction in a school? It's oral. You have to hear it. So if your listening skills aren't developed, then you're on the back foot. And that's actually what we see a lot. It was interesting because in 1993 I did a study. I was working for the NHS, and as a group we surveyed Senkos, and they were all very worried about children's listening skills then, 1993. So that was before 24-hour children's television, before iPads, before all the usual things that they have now. And I redid that when I went independent in 2010. But I did it to head teachers, and everybody said, "You'll not get head teachers to respond. They're far too busy." And I said, "Well, I think they will, because I think they'll be really worried about this aspect." And I had 93% response rate, which for a survey is amazing, isn't it?
That's
And
incredible.
they all said, "Yeah, we're so worried about children's listening skills." But just going back to what you were saying about how you were with your children, that was natural because I met your mum. She was a wonderful woman, and she'd given you a wonderful childhood. She had been a responsive carer throughout, and she was right until the end, wasn't she? She was your number one supporter.
She was. You're going to
Um,
make me cry.
oh, sorry,
That's
but
okay.
she was. She was so proud of both of you, and so that was the way she'd been brought up as well. So she knew what she needed to do. The problem now is we might be third generation, maybe even fourth generation, where they haven't had that model. So maybe, how they felt about themselves has been bad, and then that's been passed on. It's been passed on. So what we have now is a generation who don't know what good parenting looks like because they didn't experience it. So it's not their fault. Like I say, they want to know what they need to do. So they'll spend a fortune on. Have you seen those little cards where you pop it in and it tells a child what the picture is? Well, they don't need that. You just need to interact and to talk with them. I mean, it doesn't need to cost. That's the thing. It can be all really positive because it doesn't need to cost. So, the thought of having an iPad in the pushchair when you could be looking all around you and marveling. I mean, I've got a granddaughter who is 16 months. I love it. I spend Mondays with her. We don't really do very much because everything takes such a long time. I have the beauty of not having to do the housework or the cooking or the cleaning or anything like that. I'm just with her. So I bought her a little red bucket and we go for a walk on the lane where they live. And it can take us ages because she will spot a stick that looks a bit odd or a leaf that looks different to the others. Then she'll see a bird and then she'll just want to go and stand and stare at somebody's gates. But all the time we're talking about what we're looking at. And consequently, her language is absolutely amazing. Um, and and that's cost nothing. It's just having a responsive carer.
Yeah. And it's letting them have that curiosity, isn't it? I think that's the thing that I think, the screens thing doesn't do. It's like broadcasting. There's no interaction, is there? Information and color and stimulation, all those things are coming your way, but there's no sort of interaction. And of course, when they go to school, there's going to be a lot of that. And that could be quite a shock. But yeah, I think sometimes when we look at children, I love how they're just in awe of sort of everything they see when they get that opportunity. And no matter how simple a thing we might think it is, clearly as they're growing and learning, it's so important. I want to go back to that report that you talked about, where the Americans said, wealthy parents um, spend time with their children, and poor don't. And I think it's very irresponsible, isn't it, in many respects, because people can take that on board and sort of just add to, if you have somebody who is working all hours, in order to keep their family safe and fed and so on, to sort of be told that you're not going to be giving your child the right stimulus because you're doing all this sounds really, really awful. If we take that responsibility on as a society, what would you like to see put in place that can help all parents and grandparents? I'm going to include the grandparents here, really, and anyone around those children.
I mean, there are things around. So the National Literacy Trust have got some great initiatives. Um, Now, they were delivered by the Children's Centre previously, so we did lots and lots of work in the children's centres, but they sort of died a death really in about 2016. There are parent hubs now, but what I was really hoping for when the Labour government got in was um, they would light up and fly again with the children's centres because that made everything accessible to people. Um, there was one in Stafford. We did a lot of work there. For instance, we did a 10-week course on how to stimulate your child's language. Week 10, I said, right, you've done so well. I want you to do me the 10 top tips for other parents. And you know what? They did 10 top tips as good as I could do. Which was marvellous. And then the local commissioner was there and she saw how well these parents had got on, how well they'd done, how much their children were coming on. And so she then commissioned, it was us and Chuckle Productions in Stone. And we then did whatever you want to do, we'll cover. And they were saying, well, we keep being told that we need to feed our children healthy meals, but actually we don't know what that means. What is a healthy meal? What does it look like? And so we took an average day of food, and we showed them how much salt was in it, how much sugar was in it, and they all made fabulous changes. But it is about empowering people. It's about letting them know that, they don't have to go out and buy the latest iPad.
Mm.
Good quality time. And it doesn't have to be all day, every day. Could be 10 minutes where you're just giving your full attention to your child. And you're following their lead, talking about what they want to talk about. Many parents aren't reading bedtime stories anymore. Again, they might be putting the iPad on or letting them watch Netflix or whatever, or Peppa Pig, but just having a book together. And it doesn't matter what the book is. The book is like the vehicle for the interaction. So you don't have to. So some might say, well, I can't read very well myself, so I'm not going to do that. It doesn't matter, because you can just discuss the pictures. It doesn't matter what the book is. It literally is a vehicle for the interaction. It could even be a textbook and you're just looking at the pictures. It doesn't matter. But it's about sharing quality time together so that it's building that white matter, and it's building their interaction skills. More than that, they're feeling that they're listened to, that somebody's interested in them, somebody wants to be involved in their life. There's so much more to very simple interactions than people realise. So certainly the National Literature Trust have been working for a long time to try and do this. People don't realise that your spoken language is the biggest predictor of your educational success, and that parents have the biggest influence on their children till they're around 14. So it doesn't matter how good the school, how good the nursery, parents still have the biggest influence. And it's all these things that if parents knew, I know it would be another hassle, but it doesn't have to be, because we're not talking about, you don't have to do it all day, every day, just short periods of time just to focus on your child and communicate with them, just listening to them, following their lead, talking about what they're interested in. And it doesn't cost anything.
I mean, I'm blown away by all of this, and I'm sort of having this like, oh my gosh, what are we becoming? What as a humanity, if nothing else. But the thing that I think you've said there, that I think, yeah, actually, if we can get across that even 10 minutes a day, even 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the evening of just pure, absolute attention with the child could change everything. Is that fair to say?
It's absolutely true. Yes, definitely.
We definitely live in this society where everything is so fast. We are bombarded with information all the time. And there's almost like a level of guilt that if you are just spending quality time with your child for 10 minutes, it's like, I could be doing something else. I've come across so many women who run their own business that fight with guilt of spending time with their children because they're not building their business, and guilt when they're with their business that they're not spending that time with their children. This is an incredible problem. This is, and I think, as you said at the very start, how we see ourselves. It seems to be, if you're seen to be wasting time, not doing something productive, maybe that's part of our problem, because when we slow down enough to give a toddler, a small child, our full attention, maybe that's too alien for many people now.
I would agree. And, we feel that we've moved on as a society. We're so accepting of all sorts of things, aren't we? We've moved on. But have we moved on, or have we gone backwards? And that is an issue, because we know from the Victorians that children shouldn't just be seen and not heard. That
Yes.
doesn't work. But if you look at a family in a restaurant now, they'll all be on iPads, won't they? Um, and they're seen and not heard because they're just doing their own thing. But are they enjoying a family meal? Not really, are they? Because they're eating, but they're absorbed by the iPad or the iPhone. They're not having that conversation around the table. I'm not saying don't don't let them watch television, don't let them have screens, but you just need to know the implications if you're doing that as the babysitter. And like you said, there's going to be times when you want to prepare food, or you've desperately got to finish that report, that it's useful, but not as your go-to. Because if you do it as a go-to, then it becomes damaging then to the child.
It's a theme, isn't it? It's
Yes,
a theme that we need to live more in the now. We're constantly worried about the future and carrying things from the past when actually, this essentially is let's live in the present. And they're not children for
absolutely.
long. I know I always remember that phrase, the days are long, but but the years are short. Let me say that again. The days are long, but the years are short. And I can remember hearing that when my two were little, thinking, oh, that is so true, so, so true.
But maybe you don't always realize it at the time, so if you are struggling to fit everything into your day, and you're just glad that when they've gone to bed. And people say that, don't they? And I do remember thinking, somebody said, oh, they'll be 18 before you know it, thinking, how stupid's that? They were right. But when I was in the midst of that, I didn't really see that. And, when you look back, you do wish you'd appreciated that time more. I did appreciate it. I loved it. But living in the moment, I think you must hear that a lot when you're doing these interviews. But that's really what we need to do. And, on a Monday, I'm so privileged to live in that moment, because we can stand and stare at things, or we had a stick and we were playing music on the bars of the pub.
Oh, I want to come with you, Libby. It sounds fantastic.
It is, and it's a privilege. um, and and I think parents don't always appreciate how brilliant that time is in a child's life. And a lot of their brain development is done before the age of 2, so Um, there's such a lot that we can do at that time. And like I said, it doesn't have to cost anything but time. And time is precious at the minute. But how long do we spend scrolling through social media, or watching soaps or things like that? So it isn't a case. Sometimes it's just about making it a priority.
Yeah, if we can get more understanding of how it really is affecting their development as just little people, being able to enter enter into the big wide world, then I think that might make a difference. I certainly was very, very surprised at those figures.
But I think general society would be. Um, But the reality is, it's been a problem for a long time, and it's not getting any better. And the problem is the whole of the education system. Don't get me started on that; it's a different one. Um, but if you think, when I was at school, so I started school in the 1960s, and my teacher, Mrs. Worker, really didn't have any mandate to teach us anything. So she did spend a lot of time talking to Mrs. Leah, who was the school secretary, and she would come into our class and they'd be nattering away. And if you needed the toilet, woe betide you, because if you put your hand up to ask, you be quiet, I'm busy, be quiet, I'm busy. So nearly everybody wet themselves because they were
Oh,
desperate. She just told them to be quiet. But she did teach us to read. We all had the tobacco boxes with the words in and things, and the Dick and Dora books. But her mandate was very little. Whereas if you think what a reception class teacher has to get through now in the 1960s, so if you look at the development of attention and listening, in the 1960s and 70s, it was decided that you had fully interactive or fully integrated listening. So you could be doing something, and the teacher could give you an instruction about something completely unrelated, like, you might be colouring in, and she'd say, now, at break time, everybody, you're not allowed on the grass because the tractor's going to be cutting it. no health and safety then anyway. But you could take that in, carry on with your colouring, and you'd got it. Now that, I would say you would be looking at year 6, because when I do classroom observations, they spend as much time reiterating what they've actually got to do than they did the first time of telling them. And yet, the curriculum is so jam-packed. You can recognise, and you have been able to for a long time, you can recognise a reception class teacher, usually just before the half term in October. They'll be the one, if you're in the staff room at the end of the day, they're the one with the red face looking flustered.
Yeah.
Because they've got so much to get through. And in the 70s, we were ready and ripe and primed to learn, but we're not now. And or a big proportion of us are not now. So it is such a worry, because it's so much pressure on the staff. It's not fair on them, but it's not fair on the children either. You
Yeah.
know, if they've got extra things to do, that time could be better spent with the ones who have reasons why they've not developed their language. So the children with special educational needs. But there's this huge cohort who there's no other reason why. And, the teachers do an amazing job because they help them catch up. So most of these children will catch up because the teachers will make sure that happens. But it's such a responsibility for them. It's no wonder we lose so many good teachers.
We hear all the time, you mentioned earlier as well that there aren't enough speech therapists. I noticed you've got that in there. You can understand, can't you, how frustrating that is with the workload that they've got, and then with, like you say, having to catch up the children before they can even start.
And don't forget, some of those will still be in nappies, so with no physical reason why they should still be in nappies.
I'm actually speechless.
It's a mess, it really is.
It makes me feel quite emotional.
It's sad. It's sad.
It's really, really sad, isn't it?
But with the right stimulation, they can catch up. So Tamworth was one of the worst areas in the country. And we did a huge project there. And we were able to change the early years profile, by just empowering parents and staff in nurseries and just showing them what they could work on, how they could do that. We made a massive difference. Unfortunately, that funding was cut with the children's centres, but we all have the power to do something about it, because the solution is quite simple. We need to know about it and then
Yeah.
just make those small changes. But while people are worried about housing, money, relationships, that is always going to have a big effect on how they're interacting with their children. Not wanting to get political, but it is political, isn't it?
Yeah, it very much is so, and it brings us back to what you said at the beginning. At that, it's almost like we need to step one step back and understand why so many small children are being given iPads or screens, or, their phone, or what is actually making that happen to that level. Being mindful about, we need more education to help primary caretaker, perhaps, whether that's a man or a woman, it doesn't matter. They're under that kind of pressure, and it is awful when you're in that space and you're not responsible for children. It's bad enough, but if you're in that space and you are responsible for children, it must be just horrendous. And
Yeah,
so I think we have to have that level of compassion, but yes, we need the support sort of twofold, really, don't we?
we do.
So they can support the parent.
Because the whole process of language and communication, there aren't enough superlatives to describe it, because it's amazing. The child comes into the world only reacting. So they're reacting to, oh, I feel a bit cold, oh, I'm hungry, my nappy's wet, and then less than 3 short years later, so less than 36 months later, they're making sense of the world via language. Why? I don't like supermarket shopping anyway, but I actually stopped doing supermarket shopping because I found that I was the grumpy old woman who wanted to tell parents, I wanted to tell them off, when they said, "Oh, shut up, you, shut up, will you shut up?" And I'm thinking, but it's marvelous, it's marvelous. Can't you think about what you're doing? And right now, we need some nice juicy red apples. Do you think you can go and find those for me? And I stopped going because I felt that I was being a grumpy old woman, and that was probably about 20 years ago. So it's even worse now. Um, but so if people could appreciate that, because it is marvelous. We spend a lot of time celebrating, 25 meters swimming, or we've got stage 2 ballet. Well, how great! But pardon me if I don't get too excited about that, because human communication is what is so special, and I think that's one of the things we've lost sight about.
Let's have a little summary here of some of the key things.
The general figure, if you take out the worst areas, is around 38%. Um, but that's still a hell of a lot, isn't it? That are not starting school with the right level of language and communication. And that's not due to any special educational need or any reason why that should be the case. It's just because they have not had the right stimulation.
Yeah.
So we've got to be really clear on that, because otherwise, parents of children who have special educational needs will feel we're talking about them. We're certainly
Yeah.
not.
No, I love that you separated that at the made that very clear at the start. 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's all it needs to be. It could just be 10 minutes of quality interaction where you're not on the phone, you haven't got the TV on, you're reading a story, you're following them, um, you're just seeing what they're interested in, adding a commentary to it. A good quality interaction. The rest of the time, you can be doing your jobs, but you can be narrating it, doing a running commentary. Oh, look, let's hang this black sock on the area. Oh, can you pass me the other black sock? Look, they're the same. Let's put that one on. It doesn't take a lot to add that good quality interaction. We're very lucky that we have really well trained nursery staff, and really well trained school staff. But obviously, as a parent, there's such a lot that you can do.
Thank you so very, very much. Is there anything you want to sort of, add into this conversation?
The National Literacy Trust have some really good resources and ideas for parents as well as for professional carers. But just spending quality time, because at the end of the day, it is being in the moment, and it is being responsive. So we all need human connection, but I think as a society we've almost forgotten that. But that's how we feel good, is human connection, and this applies to babies and toddlers just the same.
Yeah.
And babies are hardwired for human connection. So neurotypical babies, hardwired. So you look over the cot, they get a flush of happy hormones. They get oxytocin, serotonin, and opioids. So yeah, it's addictive.
Mm.
And when they've been MRI scanned, the pleasure area of the brain then flashes like beacons. They're hardwired. They want that interaction. If they don't get that interaction, then they stop needing it. So it always worries me when babies don't cry if nobody comes, because that shows me that nobody came. So there's no point in crying, is there? Because nobody comes.
Yeah. It didn't work for them. I could be getting myself into a lot of trouble here. I loved reading stories. I loved that part of the day,
Me too.
after bath, and we always had a routine. And I mean, since my ADHD diagnosis, I'm like, that's how I managed to do everything, was to have
Me too.
the routines, and you kind of look back and go, yes, that's I always rebelled against routines, but in terms of morning and bedtime, it was, because otherwise we wouldn't have got through it. But I have to say, those times were so special, the and I'm just thinking now, when it comes to Christmas and gifts and things like that, is, have we just got used to saying, "Oh, we'll give them some money because they want the latest gadget or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I could be getting myself into a lot of trouble here if you start turning up with books and they're like, they don't want that.
You got as much out of that, didn't you? That bedtime, or maybe even
Oh
more.
gosh. I mean, with my selfish hat on, I loved that. That was my favorite time of day. And it was definitely no matter what, everything has to stop now because we're going to
Yeah,
have tea and go through all of that. And they remember those times as well. They do remember being read to. And then I remember when they got too big and they were like, Mum, we don't want to do this anymore, kind of thing. Um, 16. I mean, at 16, surely you still want a story read. No, clearly I'm kidding. But yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? It's going back to basics.
it is. It is. And looking at what's really important, should we not be doing that for the other things, living in the moment, the mindfulness, all those things? What actually makes us feel good?
What a great question to end our interview, this episode on, because I think that's it. All the work that I do with clients with Start Over and Rise is like getting back to basics so that we can make good decisions, looking after yourself, and really reassessing what is important now, and then redefining who you are. So I think it begs a question, isn't it? Redefining what is important. And I'm going to say, with the children in our lives, what are the things that we need to remind ourselves of? And it is attention and stimulation
It is.
in a non-digital way.
Yes, I agree totally.
Libby, thank you so much. Absolute pleasure. And I'm going to pledge this now. This is not going to be the last time. I'm going to make sure that you come on. And where can people find your podcast, Libby?
It's called Let's Talk Small Talk, and it's on all the usual platforms.
And I'll make sure that there's links to them all in the show notes. And yes, I would love to have you back if you're up for it
Certainly,
to talk about your story, because
of course.
you've definitely had some pivots and changes and done some amazing things in your life as well. So. And a big thanks to you today for joining me. If you got value from this episode, please do like and subscribe. And if you've been nodding along to this today and you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, maybe run down, or even just in need of a big shake-up, then book a call with me. You'll find the links in the show note, and let's get you on the right path to your next chapter so that you can start over and rise from where you are right now to where you want to be. You take care, and I'll see you on the next episode.